Good afternoon, everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming for yet another great session of the Authors Afternoon in Taj, Bengal. As you're aware, this is an initiative of the Gulha Khaitan Foundation in collaboration with Taj Bengal and T2 of Telegraph, and the Shree Cements are the presenters of this series. It's my honor and privilege to welcome Mr. Kishalay Bhattacharjee, recipient of many awards including the Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award 2006-07 for his coverage of internally displaced people. He has also made several documentaries, one of which, Santi, Lucy and Toibi, are screened at the international festivals of Goa and Barcelona. Kishalay currently teaches in the School of Journalism and Communications at OP Jindal Global University, Sonipat, Haryana. To be in conversation with him today, we are very honored to welcome Ms. Sarita Dasgupta, born and brought up in Shillong and writer of various short stories. Sarita scripts and directs plays and musicals for school children on relevant topics such as human rights, environmental protection, and animal rights. Serious topics, but always with dollops of humor. She is currently the editor of multinational tea company's House Journal and does freelancing, writing, and editing. We all look forward to a lovely session this afternoon. Please get started and you all enjoy yourself. Thank you so much.
So, as you've heard about Kishalay, and he's written 3 books based on his experiences in conflict areas. Kishalay he spent his childhood in Shillong, and then he left, and he went back as a journalist. I'd just like to ask him, you initially went for a year, but you stayed back for, I think, over a decade. Was that by choice?
Actually, not quite, in the sense that I was in Delhi. I was working for a television network, NDTV, and there weren't many television networks those days, private television networks. Our resources were meager, but I used to cover conflict, and we have this habit, anywhere in the world, we paratroop. We go whenever there's an incident that happens and we go there and cover. And I felt that was a little unfair to the region, to the people that you cover, because you tend to just go pick up that story when X number of people die, but you really don't understand the place. That was something that I was confronted with. And just by chance accident, I went for a year to set up the studio in Guwahati. My daughter was born, and mother was going for maternity to Guwahati. Her parents were living there that time, and that's why I chose to go there and the region. And when I reached there, I remember, looking back now, the day I reached actually in Guwahati, in Manipur, a lady who later everyone got to know as Iram Sharmila, started on her fast on that very day. A couple of days later, after I reached, exactly a couple of days later, I went to this place called Nalbari in Lower Assam, and where 11 people were killed on a night of celebration. And when I was returning, covering the death of these 11 people, on the way, I was directed to another place where another 17 people were killed. And this whole, the series of massacres on a daily basis kept happening. So, after a year, there wasn't it didn't make any sense for me to return to Delhi. So I continued to stay. So neither my office asked me to come back, nor did I, expressed desire to go back. I was completely sucked in the whole, the dance of death, as it were, out there, which continued for a very long time. And then I got tired. I got exhausted. I realized that I was repeating the same story again and again. It was just, the scene was different. It was the same, even the visual was the same, because you just had bodies covered in white cloth or in chatai, and it didn't make any sense. We were getting less and less air time to be able to cover. unless you had a double-digit number of people dying, you still didn't make it to the headline. So you would just be somewhere a snippet news, somewhere as a ticker news. And I wanted to get out of the place, get out of the region. By then, of course, I was covering other areas of conflict as well. But conflict is extremely sexy, but it's also very, very difficult. It's very exhausting actually on the ground to do, and that's when I actually hung up my boots and I decided to sign up writing books and then took up teaching.
Okay, so you just mentioned about the stories that you covered, and I think there were some untold stories, and so you decided to put them in your first book, Che in Paona Bazaar. And Che, of course, Che Guevara.
Yeah.
And could you tell us something about your first book?
This is the book that I didn't think of, there was no plan really when I was writing this book. These were from little notes that I would make while reporting some of the story. It mainly is out of Manipur, but it touches on other states as well. One of the biggest problems that I confronted while covering that region was that for the rest of the country and for people out there also, that region was seen as one. Whereas actually that region has, the states have nothing in common whatsoever. I grew up in Shillong in the 70s and 80s. I did not know what Manipur or Nagaland or Mizoram looked like. I had absolutely no idea. I had friends from those places, we interacted with those friends, but beyond that, I did not know what those places were like. When I went back, it was only when I went back and I started traveling that I actually had a glimpse of those places, and that too just a glimpse initially. And I realized that, say for example, Arunachal Pradesh has nothing in common whatsoever with Meghalaya. Meghalaya has nothing to do with Sikkim. Sikkim has nothing to do with Manipur. I mean, these are completely, sometimes even the linguistic, the language families are different. So ethnically they are different. Sometimes even racially they are different, which can be contested. But there is, say there is so much of commonality between Punjab and Haryana and Rajasthan or UP, that even that commonality is not going to be found in the Northeast. And that is where I started trying to explain when people would talk about Northeast. The term Northeast fits I'm very uncomfortable with the term Northeast because it doesn't really explain the people and places out there. And I always point fingers at myself because I'm one of those persons responsible perhaps for stereotyping and ghettoizing these regions because the nature of the beast was such that we went only to report when people die. And it appeared after a long period of time, after 20 years when you report regions which only through the prism of death and violence, then people outside tend to look at those places only as violent people. So you look at Kashmir only as violent people because the only thing that we report from Kashmir is Srinagar or the LOC. There is nothing else. The Bakarwals, for example, of Kashmir are never talked about in the national space. In Manipur, for example, I picked up. So these are the stories that I picked up, which also joins the dots of who these people are, what they do. I mean, what fascinated me was that, say for example, in a 4-hour curfew relaxation in Manipur, and 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, these were really bad street fighting years. So between, say for example, there's a 4-hour relaxation, you'll actually have a marriage party, playing the band, the police band, and going and getting married. Because people get married. I mean, it's not like people are not getting married. People are going for funeral processions. What also fascinated me about Manipur was that, and it's the best sporting state in the country. I mean, in any competitions, international, national, they always are at the top. Except for cricket, they excel in almost everything, including baseball. And there would be like this little gap of 4 hours. In that, the father or the man of the family is queuing up in front of one ATM, long 2-kilometer queue, but he needs to take money out. The woman has gone to the market to pick up things. The children have actually gone to the stadium to practice because some international championship coming out. I mean, in which place do you have this kind of sanity along with dysfunctionality? And I thought those stories are otherwise difficult to tell in the national space that we get, but was very important for me to tell because otherwise we are not being. Otherwise, what we've done is that we've trapped those people and places in the image of a violent people, just like, say for example, Palestine. I mean, when was the last time you would hear or read about Palestine? Whenever there's some kind of a violence. Otherwise, we don't know what happens in Palestine. We don't know what happens in places, any of these violent places. Afghanistan. I mean, the only time you hear about Afghanistan is when there is a suicide bombing and there are 20 people dead on the streets of Kabul. But otherwise, we've forgotten the map of Afghanistan, what it looks like.
Yeah, the other dimensions that
yeah. So that was an attempt to, when I wrote this book, be able to actually, how do you represent the people and places? One way is, of course, to let them speak their own stories or tell those stories which otherwise will not be reported. But another story I remember, there was this lady who I was passing by in Manipur again, and I stopped. We had a flat tire, and so I stopped and I was talking to her, and she was tending her plants in the garden. She was picking up something from a kitchen garden, sending her children's school, and I started talking to her, and I found out that she's won 3 golds in the Asian Games. Now, and every household out there, every single household out there will have a sports champion of some level.
Yeah, and like the archery champion.
All of them. From boxing to archery to anything you name. And every family has someone. At the same time, many families, majority of the families, will have somebody who is also in the underground movement. So it's a peculiar kind of a society that they live in. In Delhi, for example, even today, when every Manipuri, when they call up home, they expect to hear. They actually expect the worst. Every evening when they call home, they expect that someone in the family probably has gone missing. Someone in the family probably is going to, has been killed. Somebody probably has gone and joined the underground. So how do these people live? And at the same time, they are excelling in sports, in their education. They are, doing well everywhere. How does that work? It works obviously because we haven't been able to, really pick up those stories and tell the stories. It is a normal, regular. Their aspirations are as much as our aspirations. It's just that they've learned how to live with the odds. They live with great odds than we do. And that needs to be celebrated as well.
Yeah, to put your life on hold for the 20 hours and the 4 hours you finish what
Yeah.
you live into the
it's a grief of sorts that is difficult. There's poetry in it, but he's in exile. But how long does one live in exile? I have learned to live in exile forever. I travel. I go through life with 2 suitcases, without any material attachments, because I've kind of figured out that it's much easier to go on living like this. It suits my profession. It also suits my. You don't have to feel bad about it, so you kind of completely stay detached, because there isn't any end of feeling bad about it. I go back to my hometown for school reunions, and school reunions. It's been 2 years now that I think a certain kind of closure has come. And I remember when we had our centenary celebration, we had the students, the Khasi students who many of them stayed back in Shillong. They organized everything, and it was an absolute revelation, because in the evening, I remember before dinner, they stopped the music, and one of them, as on behalf of the others, he had tears in his eyes, and he said, we are sorry. Just the word sorry makes a lot of difference. We also realized that without us realizing, as we grew up, there was a very sharp dividing line between the tribals and the non-tribals. And how we figured that out is that we all carried our old photographs. There was not one single photograph of our walkathons and picnics and hikes where there were tribal, non-tribal students together. So the photographs either had tribal students or had non-tribal students. And we said, how did we go through life like this? We never shared our lunches. We didn't go to each other's home, but everything seemed perfectly fine. We didn't fight. It's just that we did not physically fight. But there was that difference. And I think it took that many years. It took 30 years. It actually took 32 years for us to come and say, sorry, we should have done this. We should have, why didn't we realize that? Why didn't we say this sorry much earlier? Now it's much better, but now it's, so much time has lapsed really. We try and now, meet up every year. We try and, share much more. But, the entire youth has gone without really knowing our classmates.
It's very sad that the political situation it affected children, which it shouldn't.
Yeah.
We usually, that's what the prejudices of adults actually affect children. Children have no prejudices. You don't know like who's what religion, what. So that's sad that it came that way. So we go to the second book, Blood on My Hands, which is a darker book and based on two conflict areas.
Yeah.
Or rather, more than that actually, like if you don't want to take the Northeast as one entity, which I totally agree with by the way. So Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland, Assam,
Yeah.
and then
Jammu
and Kashmir. And what was, I think you had it created quite a furore in Jammu and Kashmir and Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But what was the response from these states, the northeastern states, or
There
the
wasn't,
government?
there wasn't any response at all. It's when this book was in 2015, I published this book, and it's on encounters. So when the first editor, a book goes through several, you have a copy editor, structural editor, this editor, that editor, 3-4 editors happen. So the first editor of the book was an Australian gentleman called Carl Hart. It was brilliant, and Carl hadn't read my manuscript. He had seen the title of the book, and he called me up, and he asked me. He said that is this a thriller? And I said, no, Carl, this isn't a thriller. Why would you think so? And he said, no. He says he called it Encounters. Now, for some reason, though we speak in English and though we write in English, the English that we speak and write is not necessarily the English that is spoken and written
by the Queen.
Yeah, by the Queen. Encounter actually means a romantic encounter. So in the West, encounters do not have a connotation of a gunfight. It's actually the word encounter assumed the connotation of a killing in your streets out here in Calcutta. This was during the Naxal movement that actually the encounters started out here.
Okay, but how did you get these people to speak to you about, how they killed and?
Again, this was a completely unplanned book. I was sitting, in fact, actually in Fort William one evening, and with a serving army officer. When I wrote this, he was serving, and of course, entirely based on trust. As a journalist, you develop your sources, and they are. You take those sources to your grave. That's an unwritten code. You never give your sources up, even to the government, and nobody can force us to give our sources up, really. And this gentleman was sitting out here. I was having a drink with him, and he suddenly I forget how he came to that discussion, but he mentioned about one incident where 7 Harkatul Mujahideen militants or terrorists were killed one morning, and I had reported it. And he asked me, he says, remember you reported this? And I said, yes. And he laughed, and he said, how could you do that? I said, it was reported. It was there was an official statement by the Defense Ministry. He said, not one of them were Harkatul Mujahideen terrorists. I said, who are they? And he told me who they were. They were porters. They were migrant laborers. And I said, but we always were suspicious of encounters, but unless there was a kind of unless the people out there reacted to a killing out there, we didn't have the resource to really send somebody or go ourselves out there to cover that. It didn't make sense. Say, for example, one person shot dead on Bhutan border. Why would you go there for that one person? A is that I do not have any forensic, ballistic expertise to really go out there and check the dead and find out whether there is any problem there. Even if I found out, who am I? I'm not an investigative officer. And it did make sense. But if the village out there was up in arms and saying that no, this was an innocent person who had been killed, what happened, say, for example, in Kunan Poshpora, which completed its anniversary on 23rd, yesterday, and or in Chittishinpura or in Machil, those places. Northeast are the very few cases where people would react really. So you didn't go and investigate. And like I said, even if I were to go and investigate, there's very little that I could find out. So when he said this, I started, visiting him again and again, and taking down. I told him, do you mind if I take down notes? And he said yes, and he got interested in it. At one point, I thought, why is he telling me all this? So I asked him. I said, why are you're putting your life at risk? Because if it slips out of my mouth, or even if some kind of a hint goes out that he's telling me these stories, he's dead. He's dead meat. And he told me, everyone knows foreclosure. So he says that, when I go back home and I look at my daughter's face, he said it doesn't feel good. He says, we are in a dirty war. And I said, what is the dirty war about? And as I went probing further into incident after incident, what emerged was something completely chilling for someone who has covered conflict for 25 years. Even for me, it was hair-raising. And what is embarrassing is that every single death, that encounter killing that I have covered, probably was wrong.
You mean fake?
Yeah, every single encounter that I have covered was plain murder. It was murder because, the problem is that the performance in our country of a security personnel, very unfortunate, is head count. Okay, all the awards that you get from Ashok Chakra to all the other chakras are for people that you've killed, not for people that you've saved. Okay, now if that is going to be that's how the country is going to measure your performance, then even if I was there, I would kill. So now how do you kill? Earlier what used to happen, they used to kill people arbitrarily and they used to get into trouble. Now if you are in the business for long, then obviously, like conflict makes the whole society dysfunctional. It makes everything dysfunctional. So what happened was, and things that I had absolutely no idea, even after covering those areas in which I thought fairly, I've measured every inch of those ground, and still I did not have a sense of that years of this conflict and years of violence threw up business opportunities. So there was a mafia, the two mafias. One mafia sold human beings. So how it works is that, say for example, if I am serving a unit for 2 years or for whatever number of years, I need about 300 points. You get 5 points for a kill, you get 3 points for an arrest, you get 2 points for surrenders. Now you got to add that up because your entire unit needs it, not just you. So you get unit citations. If you get a good unit citation, then you can go for a UN posting, which gives you better opportunities. You get awards, and I'm not saying all awards everybody gets it. No, I'm going to clarify that as well, because there are people who put their foot down and they said no, and we must acknowledge that as well. That people have said no. Some people have been victimized for saying no. Some people have not been victimized, have been able to move up by saying no. Everybody who's moved up has not killed, but they know that it's a pyramidal structure. So from the lieutenant colonel point, you get chopped off, right? So from the lieutenant colonel, then you become colonel, then there's just a few brigadiers, and then you have major generals and lieutenant generals, and you have one general. So what happens to that large number of people there? Now, what happens is, supposing I was commandant of the unit, and you were one commandant of the unit, and you were one. Now I am saying that actually my area is very peaceful because I have secured peace and tranquility there, and no one's dying. Now you have already sent out 5 kills this month, and you sent out like 6 kills this month. My brigadier or my GOC says, I mean, what do you mean? You are peaceful. I mean, what are they doing then? So the terrorists are attacking your neighboring station, and your neighboring station are leaving you free, which means you're not doing your job. So your ACR doesn't work well. So in the ACRs, everything comes down to ACR. Now what the mafia, so what has happened is that over the years, because earlier I would just pick up someone and I kill to get the points, and then I would find out, oh my God, I've got into a trouble because Kashmir and these places threw up. I mean, people were very militant about it. Innocent people were being killed, which they call alley deaths. So this mafia started supplying people. So now all I have to do, and there are people, I mean, I have numbers, phone numbers, and I actually called them up, and it was so hair-raising. That's why I said this, just to corroborate the fact that I called them up for people, and they said, how many do you need? Now, how it works is that, so I call up and I say that I want 1 kill tonight, because my unit is going to move out. I'm short of 10 points. I need 2 heads. Where do I get those 2 heads? So I call this agency up, and the agency tells me, it's very tough. I've got like 1 head, but 3 of your other colleagues also want. So I'm going to auction. So that 1 live human being is auctioned. And depending on the grade of what kind of human being is going to be sold, money is, say for example, 1 lakh, 1.5 lakh, 2 lakh rupees will be, exchanged. Then I buy, because I'm desperate. So I'm going to buy that, come what may. I'm going to, in that auction, there's a particular area where the auction happens. It happens, the exchange of the body, of the live body happens with Maruti vans actually, because you can slide the door and they're drugged and they're transferred there. They're brought and they're put into something called a nursery, which means they are observed for a little while to see whether anybody is going to react to it or not. And then they are killed. When they die, when they're killed, when the bullet is shot, they usually, by that time, they've completely submitted themselves and surrendered. They don't even put up a fight. They don't even know what's happened, because they're not in this game. They don't even know what's hit them. They are going to be killed. Now what happens is that if I'm going to show it as an encounter, you have to fire at me, or you need to be carrying firearms. So I have another mafia which actually supplies the firearms, which means I have to spend another 50,000 rupees. Now, so which means I've spent about 2 lakh rupees, or a little more than that, buying 1 human being and putting arms in that human being's hand. Where do I get that money from? My slush fund allows me only 30,000 rupees a month. That's not good enough. Slush fund as in the unaudited amount. Which means I get a kickback or take a commission from allowing all kinds of smuggling to happen in my general area. Sandbank smuggling, timber, wood felling, human trafficking, wildlife trade, narcotics. And that's why that region actually produces 10% of the world's underworld economy. And that's why that economy will never die. And that's why this violence will never end, because it's a huge nexus of various kinds of players happening. So it's the mafia, that's why the mafia will continue. And that's why the armed forces out there will not be able to withdraw. It's what an army general, actually I can even name him because I've named him out here, General Bikram Singh. Bikram Singh was that time the general there, and I went and asked him about it. And I thought that he's going to throw me out of his house, but he actually told me that this is the case of a Tagra Pahalwan. In North India, the story of Tagra Pahalwan is that Pahalwan is a kind of a muscle man. So in your village there is some problem happening, and you're not being able to solve that problem. So you call the Pahalwan from a neighboring town to come and solve the problem in your village. He comes and he solves the problem, and then you want the Pahalwan to leave. But the Pahalwan by then is so used to the being pampered and being indulged that Pahalwan refuses to leave. I mean, Assam, for example, now over 20 years you've got the army out there. What business of the army got to be there? There is no insurgency there at all. There's nothing, none of the groups are operating out there. Why should the army be there? Tripura only very recently, the AFSPA was called off. In Manipur, which is one of the worst performing states in terms of
police conviction and insurgency. The main part of the Imphal Valley does not have the Disturbed Areas Act. So you've got Disturbed Areas Act in places where you actually don't need it. So because the armed forces need to be there. And it's not just only the army, the police also piggybacks on it because there's always a joint operation that happens. So in the joint operation, they also say that, see, you can't be taking all the awards yourself, we'll share the awards. So you get an award, I get an award, one person gets killed, we are in a joint operation, and we'll kind of raise the fund. So they raise the fund together, they kill together, they share the booty together. And this is the vicious cycle that the book talks about.
Okay. And that's quite an insight actually. I don't think, I mean, at least I never knew about this. It must have been quite a shock to you to learn that all that you had reported in good faith was actually not true. So that must have been quite.
I mean, it was even more difficult. There was one incident of a, in terrorist parlance, we always, when we report conflict, we say self-styled lieutenant has been killed. Because they're all self-styled, right? I mean, I can't call them lieutenant. So there was one incident I remember that I reported where I said a self-styled major of the Bodo, of the NDTV, National Democratic Front of Bodoland, shot dead on Bhutan border. And while writing this book, I realized that this guy was a beggar, a leper, who was picked up from Ramya railway station and killed in cold blood by a person that I know, by a person in whose house I've gone and I've had a drink with, who would actually, how he would raise money was a different way. Every truck carrying motorcycles, different companies of motorcycles that would pass by, his unit was on the highway, that would stop, 2 motorcycles would be taken off, and he would sell that and make the money to buy the people. But in case of picking up a beggar and killing, you didn't require money. You see, the art is, it's written out here. If you're unaccounted for, you run the risk of being abducted and killed. So in India, if you don't have an identity card, if you're not accounted for, you will be killed. The most inexpensive kills are the fresh migrants who illegally move from Bangladesh into India. You got to pick them up the moment they enter, and you're safe. Because if they are killed, who's going to cry for them? Who's going to mourn for them? Who's going to go to a police station and file a missing persons report? Because they are illegally in this country. So you pick up jailbirds who've just stepped out of the jail, who are regular jailbirds. There are lots of people in India who are regular jailbirds. They come out for 3 months and then go back again. Pick them up because their families don't even wait for them. Okay, so there are the categories of people. You remember what happened in 2015 in the Seshachalam forest of Andhra Pradesh, where some red sand smugglers were killed. That's what the police said. And in the report that followed out there, the inescapable conclusion that flows from analysis of the facts available to the team is that 20 innocent villagers from Tamil Nadu traveling through Andhra Pradesh in search of work were murdered in cold blood by policemen of the Andhra Pradesh Task Force on the morning of 7th April as the last act in a planned, elaborate operation that began with the abduction and torture of the victims, chosen apparently at random the night before. None of these had any identity cards. So the moment you don't have any identity cards, so that's why I said I know that the book emerged from many years of reporting such arbitrary encounters where I could only report from 2 perspectives. The official state, police, army version and the account of the families of the victims. In researching this book, I encountered the perpetrators of this form of manhunt for the first time. And you know what manhunt is? Manhunt is the most pathological and the most delirious form of hunting as human beings. Hunting your own, there is no greater thrill than hunting your own species. That is, even in ancient human history, hunting your own species has always been the most thrilling thing. I mean, you can hunt tigers and you can hunt elephants, but hunting your own species requires a skill that, it's extraordinary.
Even a mindset, I would
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
You have to be really...
And the whole police
different
force,
way.
the whole concept of an idea of a police was raised with this concept of hunting your own species. And in France they would hunt with a greyhound. In England they would use. I mean, it was a great. It was like a chase. They hunt down your own people.
Yeah, they're kind of running a parallel government
Oh yeah, absolutely.
in the administrative vacuums there.
Oh,
Places where even the very few, I think there are some places where there's nobody, no government official, maybe even no police, no law and order,
I
nothing.
mean,
So
yeah,
it's all easy.
yeah. There's one village that I make a case study of. I basically I did my case study or my research in an area called Koraput and Malkangiri, which is where the tri-junction happens. So your Jharkhand, Odisha, and Andhra, meet out there, and the liberated zone starts there. Liberated zone means actually there's 10,000 square kilometers of India which is under the control of the Maoists, completely liberated. Out there, no one can enter. Okay, no one means nobody can enter. And there are, 3-story tall brick martyrs' tomb out there in open ground. But who operates there? Well, as we said in Taj out here, the Tatas operate there, the SR operate there, the various other industrialists have been operating in Maoist areas with impunity, and the Maoists have been, making money from these organizations, and these organizations also have been pretty much in collaboration so as to be able to, because where is India's mineral wealth? India's mineral wealth is in those areas. So it's almost imperative that these industries will be going there. And the Maoists know that a hungry country, an energy hungry country like India will require the state to enter into those areas, and that is where the Adivasis stay completely deprived, completely exploited, and they become the spokesperson of the Adivasis on one hand, at the same time become benefactors of these industrialists. So it's like a wonderful game that is being played out in the heartland of India. And interestingly, the government of India, because it is the heart of India, and it would look ugly to send your armed forces there, is okay sending the armed forces to Jammu and Kashmir, is okay sending the armed forces to the northeast of India, but where the Prime Minister, since 2006, in every year, keeps saying that Maoist threat is the gravest internal security threat of our country, does not send the army out there, because it will look odd to the rest of the world. But how can we have army in the heart of our country? We are a peaceful, democratic country. But we are not. We are a country of excesses. We are a country of extreme human rights violations. I mean, this is a country in 1967 which actually air strafing happened in Mizoram. Aizawl was completely carpet bombed, if you remember, or if you know. I mean, people were grouped into villages. Have you heard of grouping of villages? Nagaland and Manipur. And the previous book talks about it. Nagaland and not Manipur, Nagaland and Mizoram. It was an example that Indian Army learned from the British Army of the Malay Peninsula, where you basically burned the villages. You brought all the villagers and put them into a ring, an enclosure. So what happened is that you killed their livelihood. You did not allow them to go back to their villages to continue with their lives. You plucked them out, put them out there, and carried out excesses as you felt like. After bombing the city, I mean, we bombed the city. In '67, we bombed Aizawl, and in '71, we were standing outside Dhaka trying to liberate East Pakistan from what we called Khan Sena's human rights violations in East Pakistan. On the one hand, we were trying to liberate people of human rights violations and carrying out human rights violations with impunity. That continues even today. And it may sound extremely, anti-government. I mean, I'm not trying to be anti-government out here. I'm just trying to chronicle the facts which should be told much more loudly, much more clearly, much more honestly, because we haven't even started calling out what the government. State formation happens with violence. Violence is a method of state formation, but that needs to be called out. And we can't be pointing fingers to others saying that we are a peaceful country. No, we are not. We are not a peaceful country. If 20, laborers in Andhra Pradesh, in Tamil Nadu are picked up, thrown into a truck and killed and passed off as red sanders, and then the government's agency actually finds out that they are actually laborers. I didn't find out. Government's agencies found out that they were laborers. There is a Supreme Court, judgment. The only Ashok Chakra awardee, the highest peacetime gallantry award, Major Shree Ram. The Supreme Court found out that he killed innocent people to get that award, but the award has not been stripped from him. Okay. So it's not like I am making the claims. There is a Supreme Court, the highest court of the. They have taken up. They have formed a committee of 3 people. The Supreme Court, of the 1,500 cases of fake encounters that came to them, these 3 judges and jurists picked up 6 cases randomly, found all the 6 cases of forced encounters, and now they've of the 1,500, another 249 cases the Supreme Court is going through to be able to tell the government, please withdraw the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, an act that was passed in 1958 as an emergency act. I mean, imagine our country. In 1958, an emergency act was passed for 6 months. Till 2018, in an independent democratic country run by a civilian government, an emergency act is still in place, which allows the state to kill people on suspicion. In which civilized nation of this world in 2018 will a democratic government kill people based on suspicion? In India we do. And it is allowed by statute, by parliament, by an act of parliament, which a civilian government does not have the dare to withdraw, despite the Prime Minister and the Home Minister saying that this act should go. Because the army says, no, the act should not go, the act should stay. Are we done by a martial law? Are we done by a civilian government? These are questions that even the Supreme Court is asking, and we don't have an answer.
I think Indira Gandhi had laid down some points, right, about how to deal with the tribal areas and try to integrate them and all. But nothing was done. I mean, nobody followed. She was the Prime Minister at that time, and they were very valid observations. Probably, from people who had been there and seen for themselves and reported, because I went through them, and I don't know why they were not followed. And maybe so much could have been avoided, don't you think? And you've written about
yeah,
it.
I've written, but at the same time, while I'm talking about the state, I must make it absolutely amply clear that I have no sympathies whatsoever with the other side as well, because the other side and this side seems to be on the same side. Actually, there is no other side. So the nexus between the bureaucracy and the government and the underworld and the underground, groups seem to be a very fine, cozy relationship that they work out of. I mean, you had someone called Sanjay Ghosh, who was a very well-known social worker who went to Majuli in the year. So last year we completed 20 years of his 97. 97, from Rajasthan, Sanjay Ghosh went to Majuli. Majuli is the world's biggest river and island, inhabited river and island, which every year kind of shrinks because of erosion. And why erosion happens? Variety of reasons, but one of the reasons is that permanent embankments are not built. Permanent embankments, you see in India nothing is permanently built because then the contractor loses money. So that's why from roads to embankments, everything has to be very temporary, so that next year, that's employment generation. Population, so employment generation, so leave everything half done. So similarly, those embankments are not done. And Sanjay went and he was trying to fix things out there. And of course, that did not work very well with the contractor lobby. So the contractor lobby asked the Alpha, which is the terrorist organization working out there, to get rid of him. They thought that he will be scared and intimidated and thrown out. Sanjay was still on his bicycle moving around, and he was abducted, picked up and killed. That made a huge change, because that was a marker, I feel, in Assam's history, where actually the sympathy for Alpha slowly started waning, because people really loved Sanjay. So I mean, the nexus in this country is I think very deep-seated nexus. That, of course, again, the clarification of the disclaimer should be that every person in these units is not involved in it. There are people who, just like in that infamous My Lai massacre of Vietnam, where Charles Bernhardt actually did not raise his gun, and when 504 civilians were killed in cold blood, Charles said, no, I will not kill. In fact, he told his commander that I should be killing you. So there are people within the forces who said no, who have tried to fight the system, but I don't think so. The system can be fought with such an insidious cycle of violence.
So this the unfinished revolution is about the abduction of Claudio Colangello. So yeah, and you reported on that, and then you actually went and met the abductors, and you had no idea that they were going to release him to you. I mean, you didn't go with that in mind.
Yeah.
But what do you think led to them releasing him at that time? I mean, how come? You don't mention anything about, any money changing hands or anything like that. So, did you know why he was released?
Yeah.
Claudio himself doesn't say.
See, I was in this place called Daringbari, and I never heard of the place called Daringbari. I was in Calcutta at that time. I was posted in Calcutta, and middle of the night, I was told that 2 Italian tourists were abducted in Kandhamal. I'd never covered Kandhamal. Covered other parts of Odisha, but not Kandhamal. And so I left early morning. There was an early morning flight, I remember, to Bhubaneswar. Went out there, went to Daringbari, and I thought it was a nice place. Daringbari did not have a single hotel. No, I mean, barely one eating joint. Hot like hell, 50 degrees centigrade. It was already end of March, April. I mean, Odisha can be very, very inhospitable. Found an NGO of one gentleman called Kailash Dandapat who gave us a small little room. Power cuts, cell phones don't work. I didn't know what I was doing out there. And because it was the first international abduction by the Maoists, you had international media also there, you had Italian embassy, you had everything happening all over the place. And we grabbed onto that little corner of the NGO and somehow stayed on for about, every day I used to cook, play cricket, pass my time, because what do I do? It's not like, I can call up the Maoists and say, where are you guys, let me come. So these things happen accidentally. On hindsight, they're very dramatic and nice, but out there it's very tough. And middle of the night, I remember I got a knock on my door, and I got an information that next day I was supposed to be somewhere and they would take me in. I wasn't very sure, should I go in, should I not go in? I don't trust people with guns at all. So I was not very sure that I would go, but I said, well, let's give it a chance. Went out there. How I went is quite dramatic. Anyway, I reached, the promise was that within 4 hours I'll go and come back. And I kept walking and walking and walking. For 16 hours they made us walk through in terrible terrain. My crew was almost dead. I was like at the fag end of my energy levels. I didn't even know how to get back. It was, I hated them with all my breath. Nothing to eat. I ran out of water. I wasn't prepared. It was malaria infested area. I could have died. We did not take anti-malarial shots. We were drinking drained water, which usually gets poisoned because the army or the police would poison the source of the water into these areas. Terrible, terrible time. So I was very angry. So when I met the commander, but he was very composed and he spoke in English and he was calm and he fed us whatever he was there, very bad food. No semblance of any revolution happening out there. There's nothing at all. They don't even know what's happening. Really poor, deprived people, even the Carters, they just carry guns, that's all. I realized that I'm not going back tonight. I'm going to be stuck out here. So all night, can't sleep. Flies all over your face. So I was in conversation with him, and everyone else was asleep. And I kept talking and talking and talking, and I was arguing. And at one point, I think either out of his frustration or whatever it is, he said, "Okay, I'll release one of the hostages for you."
So I think now we can take some questions from the house. If anybody would like to ask Kishalay any questions about his books.
We're really looking forward to reading your books, and you'd like to write about it, because I think this is something that everybody needs to know, because it remains very well covered up I'm from an army family, and a lot of my friends, my father's a general as well, a lot of my friends who won gallantry awards without taking their names have shared similar experiences. And it somehow came back to me without taking their names. They'd actually stand with me with a cup of tea and I said, congratulations, you won this gallantry award. So this friend of mine actually told me the whole short story of what exactly transpired in Jammu and Kashmir. He said, Sarah, I'm not really proud. This is what exactly transpired. So when this officer, who's a very dear friend, was narrating the story, I actually had tears streaming down my eyes. And I didn't know what to say. Here was this man who's a decorated officer, and he was sharing a story with me on what actually transpired and how he won the Gallantry Award, shook the core of my being. And I think somewhere whatever you shared with us resonated deep within. Thank you so much for your brilliant insights, and hope we share it forward.
Thank you. I must mention, since you said this, that when I was writing this, I went to visit someone called General Huda, who was that time the Northern Army commander. Absolutely fabulous man. I really have a lot of respect for him. When he took up as 58 Mountain Division GOC, his first memo that he sent out, he said, by the end of the year, I don't want a double-digit headcount. Not many generals would say this. So when I went to meet him in Udhampur when he was posted, I was writing this book. And there was this friend of mine who was an army guy, and he kept on saying, he says, please don't write this, please don't write this. Everyone will think, I've told you the story. I said, no, but that doesn't mean, I said, you haven't told me the story. He said, but everyone will think that, I've told you the story. So he was petrified. So he accompanied me to General Huda's house. Evening we were having a drink, and he kept nudging me. He says, tell sir that we're writing the book. So I told him, I said, I'm writing this book. And General Huda got up from his seat, he smokes, he had this, and he put the glass down, and he said, you must write this book. This mess must be cleared up. So I'm saying that even within the army circle, they want this mess to be cleaned out, because it's really not nice to come back home, see your children's face with blood on your hands. It's not a good happy thing. And who wants to kill? And for what?
And what strikes me is that it is definitely impossible to write history. It's impossible to know, because whatever we've documented, after all, you see, till a certain incident happens, you think it is true. And therefore it also raises a very, very fundamental question, that whatever is written with a certain perspective. So whether it is the World War or whether it is whatever, from liberation to anything. Therefore it does raise a whole epistemological issue about what is it that we are reading, what is it that we are writing, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel actually. It's a very scary feeling sometimes. This is the nature of a comment actually. But I think I get what you are saying.
You've written that history has many facets, different perspectives.
In fact, what comes out very clearly is that, in fact, that's something which I have also been thinking for a long time, that actually you do not know what has happened, because what has happened at that point of time, nobody knows. And those who know it, I can tell you an incident, in fact, my father was in the Punjab police, and I remember this Bhindranwale, much before Bhindranwale happened. See, Bhindranwale had stopped, there was a Chowk Mehta, so Bhindranwale had given instructions that no policeman would be allowed to have water from any of the tea stalls or whatever. So the Badala municipality, they got a big tanker of water, and so the Punjab police was there, they were having the water. So in comes one Nihang Sikh and says, I want some water. So the policeman tells him, oh cousins, the policeman this side or the militant that side. He told him that you didn't let me take water from your stall. Where do you want to have water from the Badala municipality tank? So something happened, and this Nihang, he cut off the policeman's hand with a sword. And at that instant, his colleagues fired and shot at 14 people, which is a very normal human reaction. Now, when you look at things from the perspective of the policeman, you look at things from the perspective of the and this is something which would have happened, and I would have done it, you would have done it if you were in school and your class fellow was shot dead. So I think that gets us to sometimes think, that the way history takes a turn, it is actually not in anybody's control sometimes. It's just, but
the only thing is where when you mentioned Punjab police, it's very interesting because I talk about KBS Gill, that infamous comment to Time magazine that when the courts will not give justice, then we will dispense justice ourselves. I'm not the exact quote. KBS Gill's daughter, who went to your school, is a very close friend, Chidwan, and his son went to my school. And I keep visiting their house almost every fortnight. Even now, he's just passed away a few months back. And uncle and I would sit across the table and we did not discuss the book. We pretended that I did not write about it because he had his own point of view. He says at that point of time there was nothing. It was such mayhem that I had to, and I was given a mandate. I wanted to follow that mandate. My argument with him, thankfully he never argued with me. I suppose he was too big a figure to even argue. Even in terms of size and everything. He had a presence about himself. And he was also in Shillong, and he was also in Assam, and then before coming to Punjab, he was actually some kind of. My thing is that at some point, people deserve justice. That in our country, however, has been dispensed with completely. That's impunity. So it could be that one incident could be one incident, but that incident does not necessarily mean that 100 other incidents can get away. So when the Malom massacre happened, for which Sharmila, that woman, sat on fast, if you know, it is an extremely telling example of this woman, who has not been celebrated as much as she should be, because there is no instance in human history, I think, of someone who has lived 16 years in a jail ward of a hospital without a drink of water, and then when she decides that, okay, my satyagraha and my hunger strike has not worked, I will join politics and in a democratic way try and fight the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, she gets 90 votes. A sacrifice of 16 years, and not for her own, not a single relative of hers had died in that incident. Now, what had that incident happened was, an Assam Rifles truck was going, and there was a landmine blast, and no one died really, but the truck really toppled. They got off, and the natural human reaction was they opened fire. Now, as a professional army, you cannot open fire. You know that obviously the person who's going to has planted the blast is not sitting near the road waiting for you to fire at him. It was a makeshift bus stand. 11 people were standing there. 2 children, which that year had won the Presidential Bravery Award, and all these 11 people were killed. Now, till today there is no justice for these 11 people.
I tend to agree with the gentleman. Perspectives can be different, because if I was to accept the whole of your thesis, all my faith in the system will go. So and we do not know how much sources are to be relied. In case you have not named, I know that you cannot do it, but we do not know how far they were correct, they were truthful. We don't have any idea. So
I have not based on sources.
Ambivalent.
No, so
acceptance of your thesis.
I respect your opinion.
I am sorry.
No, but just
it is not a question of agreement, because we always agree to differ. We agree to differ. That is always, as you said. But justice is important. Yes, of course. But we agree to differ. So it's not nothing to be worried about or questioned. Yes, your perspective is your perspective, mine is mine.
No, but madam, if I may clarify.
The perspective of the gentleman she is told is also something.
No, if I may clarify, so the case studies out here are not my perspective.
No, I understand.
So all the perspective, it is not thy sources. The sources gave me the leads.
History is subjective, by the way.
No, this is not history. So what I'm saying is that
This is reporting which is more subjective.
no.
Okay, I'm sorry. But
No,
that
I'm just
doesn't matter.
I'm just speaking.
But I have enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. What I'm
I
saying,
would have
ma'am.
enjoyed what you started with, if you had told us more about that. What you started with, the people, the condition of the people, the feelings of the people, the life of the people. I thought that would be, and I think that it would have been more interesting to me.
No, that's a different book. But just to clarify, ma'am, because I haven't been able, let me clarify to what you're saying, is that each of these case studies were corroborated by, not, the sources gave me the leads. With the sources, you cannot write a book. It would be completely unfair to write an anecdotal book based on, somebody saying that I killed somebody and so killed somebody. You can't do that. You have to go through the official records. For example, 5,000 dead bodies were dumped in 2 districts of Punjab, and they are nameless. One has to question that. It's not about perspective. It is not about who killed them.
No,
It is about its time in a democratic country that you have to question that who are these 5,000 people? Why were they nameless? And we know about these deaths only because the cremation ground person, because he would not have bought firewood with his own pocket money. He had to go to the municipal board to get the money. That's why he kept a list of dead body number 1, dead body number 2. Then so things like that. So you add these little dots up, and then you come to the conclusion. Say for example, the National Human Rights Commission. I'm talking about the Supreme Court. So it's not my perspective. The Supreme Court finds out that the highest gallantry award person has killed innocent 2 people. That is not anybody's perspective.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
True,
so
but
you
I
are.
haven't seen the record.
I'm saying you are free to now challenge that, and you can challenge that. I mean, we challenge
No, I
a lot
cannot
of
challenge
judgments.
the Supreme Court. But only I have not seen the evidence. I can only say that I cannot check because I have not seen it. But I accept what you
We
say.
all have family in the
different
army and
purpose.
armed forces. My father-in-law himself was a doctor in the army. He was a decorated officer many years ago, fought in the Second World War and all that. And many of us, I'm sure, have. So, there are always exceptions. But
Yeah, yes, that's true.
yeah. Everywhere you'll find some bad pennies, and they sort of
And
spoil the
everyone has a right
reputation
to
of.
differ.
Now, I'd like to pick up on what you mentioned last, is that if you look at the state, for example, India, then you've got the Supreme Court, you've got the Defense Force, you've got everything looked at. But what you mentioned is that they themselves have different takes on what's happening. Now, who reconciles that? Or is that reconciliation between what the Supreme Court and the investigating agencies have actually uncovered, and what the army in one way is trying to portray? Is it a conscious way of actually allowing those gaps to continue, or is it an unconscious way where these institutions are not being able to reconcile on the question of the truth of what's actually happening on the ground? What's your take on it?
See, because remember I told you that the government of India is hesitant to send the army to the heartland of India, right? So we are talking of Jammu and Kashmir in the northeast. And, however bad it may sound, I think the majoritarian India still looks at those places as peripheries where the army just can be sent. Some statistics can be, things are mocked up, as long as the geographical entity of the country is retained. I don't think so. The majority India has still learned to look at those places as, those people as part of the larger Indian mainstream. And that is what their grounds is as well. The whole subnational assertion there, the violent assertion, is because of a sense of alienation. And the sense of alienation...
That's being too... let us cut it out, because that's getting into too much. I mean, you got to accept there's a lot of ethnic issues, a lot of identity issues, a lot of development issues. So I think, we are moving into...
These words are not mine, by the way. These words are by a gentleman called Mr. Satyabrat Pal, who was extremely well-known diplomat. Being the foreign secretary, was the Indian High Commissioner to Islamabad. So it is a well argued fact of how these areas are not seen as mainstream India, and that is their. I mean, I grew up there. I know what their grouse is. The grouse has always been alienation.
Excuse me, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, and this whole conversation has been very interesting, and I think let's thank
Thank you so much.
Kishalay for this. We look forward to reading his books.
Thank you for such a powerful and insightful conversation and hair-raising stories. Now may I request Professor Bharti to felicitate the author and the convocation.